Aloha. Thank you. Aloha, board members. Thank you for your indulgence, and thank you to the public. This fiction that you are handed to by Shipti is, at most, it asks and begs the question, why is Shipti libeling me in this document, whereby they don't even sign it. They just say it's a staff document recommendation. The fact of the matter is this document completely distorts what I've written in all my documents that I've handed over to Chair, and all the documents that I have claiming that I claim that the iwi kupuna of Ewa is Kalola. In all my documents, I claim that Kalola Kumukauoha is her mother, Ka'omile Ka'ahumanu. And it constantly refers to my akaku and visions that were mentioned in the April 14th session 2010 as being primarily the only documents that I brought. I have 600 certified documents with including the wills of Kamehameha III with two of my grandfathers in the will, and from the Bishop Museum, chants of Kamehameha III being born in Ewa from 1906. They don't even mention all of this documentation of certified death certificates, wills showing that I am from the Meek family, Captain Meek. Eliza Meek historically had 3 kings as her lover. She is my 4th great grandmother who married Kamehameha III. She is buried in William Lunalilo's tomb on his right side. To this very day, if you open up the tomb, you'll find my grandmother lies next to him. She is in his will as the divisee of all of his possessions except for his land. My grandmother's bones lie next to King Lunalilo. She lived in all the documentation of Queen Emma's letters to her cousin Peter Ka'eo, mentioned my grandmother as the 2nd wife of Kamehameha IV, which Shipti and the state is trying to keep under wraps. And they've done a horrible job because they don't address the questions. Why have they taken the significant ali'i that was found in Ewa, which is my 5 great grandmother, who married Kamehameha I and is the true mother of Kamehameha III? Why did they take all the reports that never mention the 6-inch Niho Palawa and the 5-inch Niho Palawa that she nestled in her hands? And all of that information was put on DVD from the state of Hawaii taxpayers' money and taken and hidden in the Parks Department upstairs in this floor. Why was that done when the Shipti Library down at Kapolei 5th floor holds the records of all the burials and Shipti that is connected with Shipti except for my grandmother? Why have they hidden that? Why have, for over a year now, since the Oibc in their recommendation to Shipti to protect my family iwi kupuna for over 16 months now, has not acted on the recommendation of this body? Why has Shipti gone out of its way to be hostile in public, in these meetings, in front of the board, every time I'm here, putting my agenda on the very end, and it's almost going to go on 2 years that I've done this process? Why has, 3 weeks ago, I asked in writing that Shipti consider a mitochondrial DNA test that does not destroy the teeth or the bones to prove from a saliva from my mouth that iwi kupuna is my 5 great grandmother, and they refuse to get back with me on anything of that nature? Why, when I ask for section 6E that protects me, the person, the claimant, to be lifted in my contested case with Haseko Ewa Inc., why won't they lift the private tapes in my request as the family? And what Pua'alaiu said to me was, well, you mentioned the burial sites of your iwi kupuna that are there. We don't want that in public domain. So I said, redact it, take it out. 99% of that has nothing to do with the actual location. They refuse. Why does the state refuse to recognize my rights under Article 12, Section 7, to pursue as the kahu, the protector of my family's bones? Why have they gone through such elaborate processes to shut me down for over a year, step by step by step, and not given you, when I have actually given Kavika 2 copies of this, why hasn't it gotten to the board members? When I have asked time and time again for transparency, for the public to be able to see this documentation for themselves, to hear the records of why the protective order was taking place. Why am I being shut down? Why is my constitutional rights under Article 12, Section 7 of the state constitution being violated? And why is now Pua'aiu and Shifty, after 10 years neglecting my grandmother, why now do they want to hide her away and bury her away like her DVD in the State Parks Department, when I went down to the State Parks Department's head saying, well, it shouldn't be here, it should be at SHPD, and I concur. Why are my rights being violated? And why is Shifty, who's supposed to be the arbitrator and not step in on the side of the developer, trying every effort to shut me down, including the December 8th OIBC minutes, whereby Kuchikayan said, if Mr. Lee changes the TMK of the tax map key of the location of where the Ivikupuna and Ewa was buried, we will recognize him as the lineal descendant. Then they changed that on March 14th in a meeting with Honouliuli, their genealogist, in front of Kai Markell and his assistant on tape, and they said, well, you know, we're not going to recognize you. And I say, well, I've got all this evidence and everything, and my grandfather's in Kamehameha's will, both grandfathers. And they said, well, we're not going to recognize you until you prove that your grandmother, with all her AKAs in Western documentation, was buried in Ewa in some Western newspaper. And this is arbitrary and capricious. It's an impossible burden that no other person in the 30-year history of the entire state of all the OIBCs has ever had to meet that burden of proof. And even when I ask for a mitochondrial DNA test, they try to shut me down. Where are my rights? And as the 4th great-grandson of Kamehameha III, I ask for what is due under the rights of what is given to me by my birthright through Eliza Meek. And they have consistently tried to sandbag you with that piece of pala that isn't worth anything, when sitting before you is the documentation which I made 2 copies and gave to Kavika McKay to give to you over 3 months ago. This is an outrage to Kamehameha III's grandson. Where is the justice? I asked for Kai Markell to come up here and tell you what they tried to do to my grandmother. They won't. They're trying to get rid of her. She is the true wife of Kamehameha I. She's the true mother of Kamehameha III. This is the most important case that has ever come before the Burial Council on all islands. And I'm being shut down. Why? Because it threatens the power structure that backs the developers for the state revenues. That's why. Heva. Does anybody know when Kamehameha III was born? No, they don't. You take the pictures of Kamehameha III, and they don't match up. You do the forensics on the face of the kid that was done in 1824 by the artist of the blonde. And then you look at this later picture that was done. And then you look at this watercolor that was done. Why don't they match up? A cover-up has been done for so long, it's time for the truth to come out. How can we heal as a nation when we don't know the truth of our real history? Ever since I mentioned that my grandmother was buried next to Lunalilo, that whole tomb area has been locked. Shut up. This is the justice of the American way. Shifty has become a god without a conscience. And what does this body stand for if when the most important issue that has ever come before it is allowed to die in front of the public? Where is my rights, my inherited rights as the 4th great-grandson of Kamehameha III and the 5th great-grandson of Kamehameha I? I asked Kai Markell to please come up here and to share with you what these people are trying to do with my grandmother's bones and why it's heava.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. What time was Kavika's estimated arrival? Do we know?
It may be later than he had anticipated.
Okay. So aloha, my name is Kai Markell. I am Compliance Manager at Office of Wine Affairs. Aloha. Sure. Aloha. Just to give you a very brief chronology so we all are on the same page on this important issue. In January of 2001, a houseless individual living out at Honouliuli was excavating a fire pit and came across some Ewi. That Ewi was reported to SHPD and Honolulu police. Sarah Collins and Muffet Jordan, our 2 archaeologists, responded. I responded, Kala'o Wahilani responded from the Burial Sites Program. The determination was made to open up the area where the Ewi was found to determine make sure it wasn't a homicide victim, make sure it wasn't a missing person, to get an understanding of the nature of the interment. I ended up returning to Hawaii Island in the middle of the Hokulea trial. And when I returned to Oahu, I found out that the Ewi had been exposed and actually recovered. And when I talked to Sarah and Muffet, they reported that it was a high-status individual, a relatively young woman who had a cache of artifacts, including kupe'e, multiple kupe'e, small whale's teeth, beads, post-contact beads, pre-contact beads. And what was most interesting to them was a very 2 large leiniho palawa that were not around her neck, but looked like it was placed in her hand, was in her hand, and they were nested together. And there were some other beads and things which indicated they might have been strung as lei. At that time, we didn't know, there was no certified shoreline survey, so she would have been treated as inadvertent discovery. We didn't know where the line was as far as Haseko's property and where the state's property was at that time. So we notified Haseko and DLNR Land Management and said that we really can't make a determination yet on her treatment until we can determine who the landowner is. And at that point, it took quite a long time to get a certified shoreline survey done. At the time she was GPSed in, we noted that she basically was in the marina entrance of where the proposed marina was going to come through the beach. Why was that significant? It was significant because when the BLNR originally granted the CDUP for the Haseko Marina entrance, it was contested in early '93. And that went up to Circuit Court. Circuit Court affirmed the BLNR's decision to grant the permit. OHA and others appealed to the Supreme Court. In '98, the Supreme Court came back, and of all the claims that were made about ceded lands and submerged lands and all these things, only one was upheld by the Supreme Court. And the one claim was that the BLNR did not properly identify the traditional resources and practices out at Honouliuli before giving that CDUP. So the language in that memorandum opinion in '98 is the exact same language as the Supreme Court used in 2000 for the landmark Kapa'akai case, where they said, before you give this permit for this marina entrance, you better find out what's out there. And that was in '98, the Supreme Court came out. '98 was the same year that some Burial Council members who are here today, some of the audience went out in '98, and there was a big furor over the sites and the site identification and what was there and what was being lost, and it was a kind of a big controversy. It was on the top of the Honouliuli Weekly. Kahu Patterson went to Kauai and convened the ecumenical coalition and all the churches. I mean, a massive list of churches signed off saying support protecting this waipana at Oneula. That was unprecedented in my history. We knew something was special about there, but we just couldn't find the things that we needed to prove under the Western system that, you know, this giant coral slab was a ku'ula stone or a marker and not just an uplifted stone that got sat up. And it was just very frustrating. So in 2000, the BLNR finally, based on the Supreme Court telling them, go look at the permit again and what resources are out there, had another hearing. And they brought in kupuna, they brought in Arlene Eaton, they brought in people who knew about the area, and they asked them, do you know of any barrels over here? And if they don't, they honestly say, no, I don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you're putting the onus of entire Lahui on one or two people to carry that burden, and then you're saying, okay, thank you very much. Their findings, there's no burial sites here. There's no spiritual sites in the entrance of the marina. That was their finding for the second time in 2000. 6 months later, 7 months later, the Iwi comes up. I'm here. Where are you? In the middle of this marina entrance. She ends up sitting on a shelf. For some strange reason, I was told by certain people who saw the Iwi before I saw the Iwi that her palau were opu'u style. Not the hook moko kiave tongue palau, but the Oahu chiefs. And in my mind, I wondered, what did that look like? And when her Iwi was transferred downtown about 3 months later in '01, I remember going through all her mea kapu, trying to make sure everything was with her, nobody took anything. And I remember seeing these two opu'u palawa. And I looked at them in the bag and I said, oh, that's what opu'u looks like. And I put it all back together. And then she stayed in there while other Iwi came and went, and all the things that happened. A certified shoreline was done, survey was done. She appeared to be on state land. We discussed her at a couple Burial Council meetings in the mid-2000, and in 2004 I was let go of DLNR, of Burial Sites Program. In 2000, that was 2004. From 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, a memo was written that there had been no monitoring of Haseko's construction in that 3 to 4 year period. SHPD had no oversight, and they admitted and they wrote it to the BLNR. I don't know what happened during that 4 year period of excavating, but in 2008, I felt like I needed to go see this kupuna, and I went to go see her, and actually Jerome from OHA was with me, and we went to go check on her, and there were all the other boxes and all the other Iwi, and I saw all my handwriting on there, and I cried because that was my handwriting from '97, that was my handwriting from 2000 and 2001, and these kupuna were still sitting there. And then I went to go look with Kaleo Pike and Jerome, and we brought down this kupuna, and we went through her Iwi, make sure everything was there. We went to all her mea kapu, and when I unwrapped the two palawa, they were hook palawas from Okokiave, and I was in shock, and at that time I thought I was losing my mind. And for the last 7 years, I've always talked about the opu'u. When I first shared her with Kalekini, Paulette, I told her about the two opu'us. And that's when she said, oh my goodness, could this be related to Kanehili and her two twins, Ke'ua Kwahua and Ke'ua Pe'ale? Were those opu'us representing Kalani opu'us, chiefess, Kanehili? I didn't know. So we kind of went down that road a little bit to try and figure out if this is true or what's the relationship. In the meantime, there was a lot of kaumaha and iha at that visit to her. Then we finished, we closed up, and we came back to OHA. That was on a Friday. The very next Wednesday, an OHA employee has a very profound akaku in the morning when she came to work. And she walked through the double doors at OHA, and she said she wasn't in OHA, she was outside. and her knees buckled, and she was disoriented, and there in front of her was a large Hawaiian woman seated with something on her head, and a smaller kako'o, and then men without shirts seated here with peripherally she could see. And the woman's looking at her in the face, and she says, Kohina Nui. Kohina Nui is coming to her. And she's thinking, what's Kohina Nui and who is Kohina Nui? And she's looking at this woman, and she says, protect, protection. And then she's downloading it, and then it dissipates. It's back in the hallway. She cries and goes to her office, and she writes it all down. And she shared it that day, that afternoon. And when I was talking with her, we were both crying. And I said, what else do you remember? And she said there were 2 coconut trees, and they were thrashing in the wind. And I said, what else do you remember? She said it was at the beach. And when she was at the beach, oh, I cried. And then she cried again. She says, why are you crying? I said, because for me, I know it's related to the kupuna we just saw on Friday. And I explained to her about her tupalawa. And was she a Kohina Nui? What was the relationship? I don't know, but I knew it was related. It wasn't until a year later when we actually took possession of the Iwi. We brought her to Oha. And after that, about 6 months after that, we had the opportunity to have a beneficiary come and hold the box of Iwi. And this beneficiary has Ike Papalua. And she started to download, and Mike was in the office. And she started to download, and she cried, and she said this woman had a very hard life. She died young. She died while giving birth. She gave birth to twins. And Kahumanu, she was getting Kahumanu, and then she said Kahumanu really made her life a living hell. And her name came over the next few days. And that was just days before April 14th, before the burial council. We were trying to figure out, what can we do? And we needed to try and determine something. And she gave her name Kaomi. Then it was Kaomi Lei. Then the person got her whole name was Kaomi Lei Kahumanu. And then she was the chiefess of Kalani Kupule. And she was the half-sister of Queen Kahumanu. And when that connection was made, we knew immediately a year before why Kahumanu showed up and said, protect her half-sister, protect Oneula, because of what Kahumanu did before she found Kiakua and Christianity. She had that jealousy, she had that ana. And then more of the mo'olelo came out, more over the days and the months. Another one of her names is Namahana, and that's Kahumanu's mother's name. Thus the jealousy. Then we find out she's the chiefess of Kalani Kupule, and they're out hiding Kalani Kupule and Ewa after the Battle of Nu'uwanapali. And these are things that Mike brought about Captain Henry Barber and how the ship went down and all this Ike that he was contributing. And then this person hooked up with another person who has Ike Papalua, and together they get even more of the story. And Kaomi would show up to them. And Kaomi Lei Kahumanu reveals that Kamehameha made her hapai. She's Kalani Kupule's chiefess, but Kamehameha got her hapai with the twins. And even Kalani Kupule doesn't know and didn't know that was not his children. And thus Kahumanu's rage at that point is to take her out. So she ends up hiding in a cave, and Kamehameha sends Keopuolani to take care of Kaomi Lei. And they're hiding in a cave, trying to keep her alive, trying to get the babies alive. And they make it to Kukani Loko. And Kamehameha wanted Liho born at Kukani Loko. But Keopuolani couldn't. But Kaomi Lei made it to Kukani Loko. And Keopuolani, Kapihe was there. Akoa, the Kamehameha sent and Kaomi Lei. And there on the Pohakwa of Kukani Loko, she gives birth to twins. The female is La'amea, who survived and Keopuolani raised. The male is Kauikeauli. Kamehameha III, and he's born stillborn because of that ana that took out his mouth. And Kapihe brings the ha of Keakua back into Kauikeauli and lifts him up. And Keopuolani emerges with him as her son. And they go and they bury Kaomi Lei Kahumanu down in Ewa at Honouliuli, where the other ali'i are buried. That's Elena. And that's the truth. And this history's been wiped out. It's been wiped out by Kahumanu. It's been wiped out by Kamehamehas who don't want Kalani Kupule, don't want the truth to come out because it keeps you in political power. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. And our kupuna are coming back now, our elite are coming back, and they're asking for forgiveness. They're asking for redemption. That's what this case is about. And this isn't something that is unique to this case. It happens all the time. Half of Nanike Kumu is about the ability of Ike Papalua, about Ulaleo, about Ho'ailona, about Haka, communicating with your kupuna, sitting on your noho on your shoulders. I don't have those skills. I can't see Uhane. I couldn't handle seeing Uhane. I would break down and want to join them. That's why Keokut doesn't give me those gifts. But they exist. And Kaomi acknowledged Mike's Ohana. She acknowledged I'm Ohana. That breaks my heart for my responsibility to her. And Mike's kahu of that area, he stepped forward. He's putting everything on the line. So I just want to share that with you. And her vision, this is very important now. Her vision is not to stop that marina. Her vision is not to block that entrance. There's more kupuna there. We asked her. We said, you want to go to Mauna Ala? Be buried there? She says, no. She wants to go Oneula. Are there other kupuna near you that will be impacted by the marina entrance? Yes. What do you want to do? She says, if ho'oponopono, if mihi, if the right heart is done, they understand times change. And they're okay with being moved. But it's got to be done right. And people got to come together and stop out of here. And she gave this vision of a white heiau. That's their burial platform on the side of the marina entrance. And there's huge white boulders out there. And that white heiau will be where they will be interred. All the kupuna that have to come out from that marina entrance. And any of their mea kapu and anything else that's with them. And it's about a symbol of building unity together and forgiveness. And ho'oponopono, doing things right. And restoring Oneula as a sacred wahikapu it is. It's the dirtiest beach on Oahu right now. You look at sand, you can't grab sand without pieces of metal, rubber, plastic, cigarette butts, everything. We let our kupuna, this is the Palikapo Ke'ua of Oahu. This is the Iao Valley of Oahu. That's where our li'i are. And this is very powerful for our lahui as a symbol of coming together and doing what's right. Not for ourselves, not for anger and everything. It's for the honor of our kupuna and a white heiau dedicated to Keakua for our lahui. And that's her vision. That's not my vision. And that's all I wanted to share. Thank you. Sorry for the emotion. And thank you.
Mahalo.
One more thing, Kai, there's one more thing about the recognition of the bones of my grandmother, fifth great grandmother, Ko'omile, that the determination is legally part of your decision, because when they removed her for emergency purposes in 2001, no disposition was made at the time. So the Oibc has full authority to decide at this point, while I'm trying to make my lineal claim, where she should be. I strongly disagree with Shipti trying to take her out and put her in an arbitrary place away, while they know a lineal claimant is stepped up for over a year making this claim. And this whole process was to take care of family, and we're being pushed aside. And OHA's the only one that has been helping us assert our rights. And technically, if you could explain the technical side of how the April 14th recognition of the burial sites takes her out of unknown to a recognized iwi kupuna that is under their jurisdiction.
Yeah, well, there's a legal issue that's unresolved that the AGs might want to look at for DLNR, and that is that when she was recovered, she was not, a decision was not made by SHPD to relocate her at that time. Because we were in the middle of being sued by Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, the whole issue at Hokulea was about who has the authority to make that decision to remove a kupuna. And everybody in SHPD backed off of that because it was a very paramount concern. We maintained only that the barrel size program had that authority. So Sarah and Muffet, what they did was, because they removed her under a provision, 13340K. And under 13340K, you can temporarily remove a kupuna to protect them from harm without making that formal decision that she's permanently going to be removed. So technically you could put her back and you could say preservation in place. And to my knowledge, that decision has not been made in the last 10 years. It took a long time because of the certified shoreline survey to even know who the landowner was. So technically, can you have an inadvertent that's been out under 13340K for 10 years and not be a previously identified site at this point, when you've accepted testimony coming in saying this is who she is, this is her identity, these are other kupuna associated with her? That raises that legal question. And I think that's something that the council may want to look at. Even if they determine that no, she's still in inadvertent discovery, SHPD is still going to determine where she goes, and hopefully it will be in where the white hail is supposed to be. You should be involved. I mean, we would like you guys involved because of the heaviness of who she is, to be a part of this discussion on her disposition, as well as opportunity for family members and the public and other people who want to weigh in. This is supposed to be a kako thing. And we really want this to be open and transparent, and it behooves all of us to work together, and even have the landowners, Haseko, involved in the discussions. We have to worry about shoreline erosion, we have to worry about the oceans rising, and we don't want to create a shoreline interment that is going to be susceptible to change in 20 years. That's not doing anybody any good. But having said that, she wants to go back to where she was found, but doesn't have to be in an exact place, but near, in a safe place. So there are some legal issues that you have to kind of ponder. But like I said, she does recognize Mike as Ohana, and she does recognize that he has a very important kahu role of trying to protect Oneula. And that's from her, that's not from me. So I just want to share that.
Mahalo.
My last request is that you take the time that is needed, that you need, to make an informed, clear, sober decision based on the evidence which this has not given you. I have given Kovika mounds of evidence like this to reproduce for all of you to have. It is my wholehearted request that whatever you make out of conscience and out of what you feel is right is based on an informed decision with the facts before you. And clearly, they also at SHPD need to seriously look at the mitochondrial DNA situation that would clear up the whole issue. And so this is a really very heavy-weighted particular case that I would respectfully ask you to take time, even though it's been over 16 months now. But you haven't gotten the real information. It hasn't gotten to all of you that I've requested over and over again. Thank you. Yeah.
Mahalo.
Are all of these the documents that you have here that they give it to Kovika also give it to SHPD?
Yes.
I noticed that the last sentence that was noted in the report from them to us was that you needed to provide more documentation.
Exactly. They want more documentation than this, and the interesting thing, I did request for them to also provide, I'm trying to get the tape of their March 14th meeting to be available to you so you can look and listen to what they said, which is just outrageous.
What year was that?
This was the April 14th meeting that was held at SHPD with Pua Alakuchi, was in 2011, April 14th at 9 o'clock. Over. It was this year. But the transcripts, we still have to go over accepting the transcripts verbatim of the December 8th minutes that were given to you, because in it, Kuchi Kayan clearly says that, yeah, we recognize Mr. Lee is the lineal person, but he has to clean up the paperwork. And then all of a sudden, 3 months later, game change. But for this, all of a sudden, their offer on the table with this it disappears. And then you get something that they don't even sign. This is not even signed by anybody. No one will put their signature to this piece of work. It's outrageous. They're not even following the law. It's liable because they don't have anything to back up what they're saying here or what's been given on tape. And I want you to have a clear and fair viewing of everything that's there. And I would like the general public to have the same opportunity as well. What do I have to hide? I have nothing to hide. Not my DNA, not the documents that I found in over 2.5 years working 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. I want the people to make up their own minds. But I ask you to do it in a fair manner. Thank you.
Mahalo. Mamo kuka ane ke ia kulana ni. Is there anything I'd like to give the opportunity, in all fairness, that should there be any response, either from Pua or Kuchi present in the room, before we have our discussion about this. And it is 11 o'clock, so any...
Just for the record, Vice Chair, who is also not. The quote from Mr. Lee is sadly incorrect. And you all who were there, the December Oibc meeting did not premise it. And it's reflected in your minutes that have yet to be Thank you.
I'll be happy to sign any copy of that you want signed. So that's not an issue. That report was done by myself and by Honouliuli, and Honouliuli can't be here, so I did the report. As I've said before, we, and I'm sorry, I cannot be as exciting as other people because we have to look at dry stuff. So our job is really to look at, is the documentation complete, and does the documentation allow us to make a lineal descent claim, which is a very high bar. We have outlined for you in that report why we do not feel the documentation, despite the vast quantity of it, meets the quality that we need to be able to answer the questions that I've outlined for you. So unless you have specific questions to that, I'm not going to go over the report in detail because we've already taken up a lot of time. There are two issues on the table today, and right now I'm just going to address the Waipouli case, so that's our report. Regarding the reburial of this set of EV, I think that's going to come up later, so we can discuss that then. Did you have specific questions?
Yes.
How are the standards applied in terms of your guys' role in determination of lineal descendancy? Beyond the administrative rules, do you have additional procedures that you have in place that, and perhaps by being a new member of the council, I'm unaware of those? And then is there some, I guess, one of the things that's been raised today is, wanting for Oibc to a degree possible to be fair and consistent in its determination of lineal descendancy. And so understanding what the informational standards are and how they're being applied in this case and other cases. Is there additional?
And by all means, you guys are welcome to read the documentation, and I know Kavika hasn't read it because he's told me that. In most cases where we recognize lineal descendants, we have known burial sites, and they're well known by oral history documentation. So it's not like this one. In these kinds of cases, we need to have clear pointers, and we cannot take only dreams as the pointers. We have to have documentation for it as well, because that's what our rules say. And we have a genealogist. So Honouliuli is our genealogist, and he looks at the documentation.
So beyond the rules, are there additional things that you have written down that are procedures by which you apply the rules that we could see and understand in terms of your process?
I don't believe so. mean, I think in order to, you'd have to ask me a more specific question, but I don't believe so.
Mahalo.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Mike raised this issue of DNA, and I'm kind of intrigued by that. He says that you're opposed to that, or?
No, actually, didn't respond to him because I need to find out how effective mitochondrial DNA is. So I've sent out inquiries. And we also have to know who's going to pay for it and how much it's going to cost. So, you know, in Hawaii, pretty much everybody is related, right? So is it going to give us a degree of distinguishment that we can actually tell, or is it not? I don't know. So those are the kinds of questions that I'm asking. How effective is it? Does it really work? I don't know. I don't know anything about mitochondrial
Okay,
DNA,
that's good.
but that's
So-
what we're doing.
So you are following?
Yes. Any other?
Any other questions? Only no, yeah.
I'm wondering if it's possible to table this particular decision until we have a more definitive response from you about the offer to utilize non-destructive mitochondrial DNA testing. My interest is as well piqued in the non-destructive nature of what might be possible. But nonetheless forward very aggressively the discussions of treatment of this kupuna toward the end of finding an agreeable resolution. What seems to be the silver lining in all of this is that the wishes that are being conveyed to us through Mike and the others that you've spoken to might be very much so in alignment with the wishes of those who would want to forward the project, where it would not limit the actions of the project.
That's not,
and so that in the end, the issue of lineal descent
doesn't
might
matter.
not be the main point. The issue might be more getting the reburial
Since that was on the
forwarded.
thing later, but we got Kai's proposal just yesterday. We don't have a problem with it, but he needs to go through the process of asking land and everything. So I don't have a problem with that.
So that way both of those two issues can be pursued simultaneously toward the mitochondrial for the lineal descent.
I think they're two separate things,
Yes,
yeah.
so they can be pursued
Yeah.
simultaneously,
That's
but
not a
separately.
problem.
And perhaps we can table this particular item until the time that
That's,
we can have.
our
mitochondrial
recommendation is
testing,
deferral,
perhaps.
so that's fine with me.
But, excuse me, Chair. Kiao, I would agree with you that there are two parallels to this discussion. And the fact remains that the final disposition and reinterment was very transparent 2 years ago when the transfer of the EV kahiko was made to OHA. In that time span, since then, over 2 years now, that discussion hasn't really borne any discussion until we are forced to the table. So now we have a proposal from OHA. Mikai, call everybody to the table, because that didn't happen in the last 2 years. And we are being very transparent about this.
And so perhaps with your involvement, that has been one of the positive outcomes. So this kupuna has taken action through you in a way that has prompted all of us to step it up. And so we probably all ought to be paying attention to it, but step it up.
So we had a meeting with OHA yesterday on that. This is I'll hold off till we actually at that item. Is that better?
We'll make it clear.
That's fine.
Because we're on a
That's
different
fine.
item. Maybe.
Yeah, that would be fine. Mahalo to you.
Thank you.
Mahalo Kuchi.
Mahalo nui.
He maumana o ea e pahakakako. Aole.
Okay.
So then, because this section, this portion of today's meeting is actually it's the resume from the last meeting, and after this, then I need to close that meeting
Chair,
and reopen.
I also have to mention, part of this meeting from last meeting was to accept the typed up verbatim of December 8, 2008 that Kai had provided you in the last meeting. He gave you all copies of it. Unless that is taken in and accepted as the verbatim record, I have no future ability to pursue legally any action because it's not recognized as evidence in the court of law, in the standards of evidence. It has to be that verbatim that was turned into you guys by Kai, handed out to each one of you in the last, has to be voted to be accepted as the minutes, as part of the minutes in the December 8th, which, as you know, you have a slew of minutes that have not been. But I, as a person coming to this body, ask you to accept those verbatim minutes of what Kuchikayan had mentioned, so that in case this has to go to litigation, cooler heads and litigious people can look at it in a dispassionate way to come out with the truth, so that my rights are not violated under Article 12, Section 7. Please protect us. Thank you.
With regards to Mr. Lee's request, I'd like commentary from each and every one of the commissioners present at the table, so that we might that we may respond to that request.
Well, I noticed that it's the first item on this month's agenda, so perhaps just for clarity, we could close the last meeting's agenda, open this one, and not defer it a second time. So that we deal with it at the top of today's agenda.
Okay.
For the scheduled meeting.
Okay.
So even if we defer to our opening of today's meeting, then that it still will have its effect. In other words, it will still be viable.
Yes.
Okay.
So that, well, that as the main thing is that we address it, because regardless of whatever it is that we decide, and we will always be accountable for that, but the main thing is that now we're able to bring this meeting to a close and resume with today's appropriate meeting. So as far as closing this meeting, we shall defer this Mr. Lee's request to our meeting scheduled for today, July 13th.
I want to make a comment.
Let's finish this part first.
But this has to do with last meeting too, because I was there. I came to the last meeting.
This pertains to Mr. Lee's request.
Yeah, Mr. Lee's request for today. Oh, no, this, we would, I think if we just work together and then it's possible to just show genealogies, because our lines are directly connected to his. And it's, you see, there's more evidence, and you know, it'll just be supported, and there's nothing, no DNA stuff would be necessary. I have this new evidence showing Kahope was the Kanehili of Honouliuli. So it's here. People can make Xerox copies, you know.
I think that could be, Chair, I think that information can come in at our next meeting, at the next, the next step. Yeah, so, because determining right now is, I think pretty much we're moving forward.
Right.
So it's, the information that you'll share with us for us to complete our last meeting will not have any detrimental effect. In other words, it could be offered at that time too.
The purpose of us
the idea is we just want to get the next meeting, get to the next step.
I just want to say that I would hope to have some forward progress though on the mitochondrial DNA testing matter, if there can be some definitive response maybe from SHPD by next month.
If I get responses, I'm sure I will.
Mahalo. Commissioner Ewa.
Just to keep this very, very brief, at think any evidence that anybody has should be given to DLNR, such as that, so that they can come to the next meeting and respond to it appropriately, if you haven't received that already.
Yeah, they'll provide a request of PUA's report about board information. So we could definitely tag them on there.
Okay. Mahalo. What I'd like to do at this time is ask that a motion be put forth by this board to defer this Kuleana regarding Mr. Lee's request and all that pertains to it from our previous meeting, and we can resume once we officially get into today's agenda. Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Second. Okay. It has been moved and seconded that Mr. Lee's Kuleana presented to us at this meeting are now officially deferred, and we shall resume with it on the meeting dated July 13th, 2011. And with that, is there a motion, or is there any further discussion? With no further discussion,
Wait, how long is it? Would it be August or July? We're gonna talk about it
today's,
some
no,
more
it's today's, I'm sorry. See, what,
Okay,
yeah,
just
because
checking.
this was from June.
Yeah, but
So,
is there further information that you'd like to present today? You want to present? Oh,
no, what I mean is, this
Yeah,
is,
I
this
know,
is
I know,
for
from
that,
last
yeah,
week,
that
yeah.
pala pala. So,
Okay.
if there's no further discussion, then the June 2011 meeting is now adjourned. And at this time, I'd like to open up today's meeting.
We have a motion to that effect to acknowledge that you are in the July 13th meeting.
Would one of our commissioners please move?
I'll move.
Motion is, it's been moved and seconded that we are now officially progressing with the agendized meeting dated July 13th, 2011.